Hello, I'm Jerry Lazarin, and welcome to today's debate on building information modeling. With me today are Phil Bernstein, Vice President of the Building Solutions Division of Autodesk, and Keith Bentley, co-founder and co-chief technology officer of Bentley Systems Incorporated. First, on behalf of myself and on behalf of our worldwide audience watching this webcast, I'd like to thank Phil and Keith and their respective teams for their industry leadership and for their cooperation and generosity in making this event possible today. We're speaking to you here from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I would like to thank the folks at MIT, the Advanced Media Center here, the Dean's Office at the School of Architecture and Planning, and especially Dean William Mitchell for helping arrange our access to this wonderful facility. Bill is traveling today and was not able to be here with us in the room, but we do have some folks who will be asking additional questions of our panelists besides myself. We have Bruce Jenkins from Daratech, we have Tom Hernandez from Building Design and Construction Magazine, and joining us by telephone will be David Weisberg from Scion Research. In terms of the format of the debate, the questions primarily will be in traditional debate form. I will ask a question, or Bruce, Tom, or David, and each of the panelists will have 3 minutes for direct response to the question, and then each will have 1 minute for rebuttal. In about the last half hour, we will reserve that time for direct questions from Phil and Keith to each other, 3 minutes of direct response, and then 1 minute for the questioner to rebut. And I'll do a little bit of summation at the end with a final question. So with that, I would like to begin. And the first question really has to do with this whole notion of building information modeling. We've been at the process of using computers to assist architects, engineers, the people who design, as well as the people who construct, own, and operate buildings and other facilities for more than 20 years. We've gone through the phase of automating the traditional hand-drawn processes that existed before computers were available, and certainly the two companies represented here today have been leaders in that effort. The opportunity is available to us now to move to a new way of creating, managing, and sharing the information about the built environment. And we have all here agreed to call this building information modeling. It's about buildings, both in the sense of buildings as artifacts and building as the building process and the building life cycle, and things that may be associated with buildings and all the disciplines therein. It's about information because it is more than just geometry. It is all of the data that pertain to the design, construction, the materials, specification, operations, cost, scheduling, and so on of a building. And we call it modeling because models are just a useful way of identifying representations or descriptions of things in formal terms. So with that understanding, I would like to ask generally, what do each of you respectively see as the benefits to architects and engineers of moving to a building information modeling solution? What is it about the available technology? This is a multi-part question. What is it about the available technology and the state of the building industry today that makes this the right time for folks to consider making that change? And how do you see what is your company's vision for where building information modeling will go from here some reasonable distance into the future? And why don't we start this first question with Keith, and then we're going to alternate in between. I'm going to be the timekeeper. Hopefully we can be pretty flexible about the questions. Keith?
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I think, first of all, I think Jerry deserves to be commended for
getting us to agree, at least on terminology. Building information modeling is a common term now that I think no one is at least offering an alternative to, so that's progress on one front. I agree with Jerry's definition of building information modeling. I look at the building part of building information modeling to mean the entire life cycle. We are talking about both design, construction, but also operations and refurbishment, et cetera. You know, you're going to have a building for a long time. You're going to have an information model for a long time. So building information modeling is a very topical thing for us to be coming up together to discuss, and let's see what we agree on, because I think we're all going to agree basically on the philosophy behind building information modeling, and I think we'll probably also agree on the benefits. You asked, what's the benefits of going to building information modeling? Certainly, an information model, if you think about it that way, is a good thing. You can get answers to questions you didn't previously have when you talk about an information model. One thing that I think we're likely, I mean, we're having a debate. The good thing about a debate is you can get to express different views on it. I think we probably do have diverging views on sort of how to get to building information modeling. You know, you talked about the 20-year history that we have. The state of the art in the world is probably not building information modeling. It is CAD. I think if you want to add to CAD a layer on top, which I'll call a managed environment or a federated database layer, you have CAD plus that, CAD providing the application platform plus a managed environment. That is, in my opinion, kind of the basis for a building information modeling system. We're talking about technology for building information modeling. So, in my view, it's let's take what we've got, let's come up with some new ideas, let's extend what we have, let's come up with some new concepts where appropriate, but let's realize that information exists and it's already been modeled in many cases, and let's build on that. So I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Great, thank you, Keith. Phil?
Well, first let me echo Keith's appreciation, Jerry, for you putting this together. You know, when we sort of invented this term, building information modeling, and we were pretty happy that everybody was willing to accept that as the definition, because it really, I think, describes at a pretty fundamental level what we're both trying to accomplish here. The idea that technology can make a pretty fundamental difference in the way the building industry works is really the core issue here, and I think that the value of an information modeling approach really has two sides. I'll call it a practical side and a more philosophical side. The practical side is the very straightforward proposition that one of the fundamental challenges that architects and engineers face every day, and I faced this when I was a practicing architect, is generating information that goes out into the field that's well coordinated, it's well understood, it's integrated, and it's less prone to errors than the documents that go out right now. That's an immediate problem that needs to be solved, that first generation CAD systems, as Keith has described them, the drafting engines simply can't address. And a model-based approach, an information model-based approach, in addition to having benefits to the downstream, gives architects and engineers a much better sense that the information that they're producing and sending out in the field is more reliable and is more coordinated. And that is the immediate benefit that I believe will drive these solutions into the marketplace. The more philosophical question is about what practitioners' roles are relative to the overall industry. I mean, we've really made a transition, I believe, where technology is core to the fundamental success of the enterprise of architecture. And that technology needs to grow and evolve, and the practice of architecture and engineering needs to grow and evolve simultaneously. And in a way, we need better tools so we can assure that our customers, who are architects and engineers and contractors, can do their job in a better way. Our company is fond of saying that the most key database in the design enterprise is the brain of the designer. That person is at the center of the network. We need to surround that person with tools that can take maximum advantage of the quality of the thinking. And to me, this transition from drafting engines to model-based solutions is the thing that's going to allow that to happen, and that's why it's critically important. And I'm pretty happy that we're actually able to have a conversation now about why this is an important idea as opposed to whether this is an important idea.
Thanks, Phil. Keith, you have any rebuttal for a minute?
Well, I don't disagree with Phil's kind of assessment of sort of the information model, the value of the information model, and why we want an information model. He describes the first generation drafting engine sort of in current terms. However, I think we were discussing first generation drafting, in 1990. I think we're well beyond that now, and we're in the 8th generation of MicroStation of the modeling tools. So I think I agree largely with what Phil's saying. I don't quite see that there's a big step from where we currently are beyond simply getting a better set of tools to manage the information that we're already creating. So that's my view of it.
Phil, do you care to respond to that?
Well, I mean, one of the things I've learned as somebody who's sort of joined the technology community from the practice community is that our noses are a little bit closer to the state of the technological grindstone than our customers are. And I think that a lot of our customers aren't really cognizant of technological evolutions in a sort of fundamental sense. They're focused on the basic problem of getting drawings out the door, and they pretty much see the technologies right now as mechanisms for cranking out drawings. Drawings are what we get paid for. Accurate drawings are the things that keep us out of trouble. And I think right now people perceive the problem fundamentally as one of making drawings, and I think our customers are less sensitive to how many times a certain platform has revved to kind of what it can do, and that, to me, that's the core issue.
Okay, thanks. I think since you both raised issues about what it is that people who are really out in the trenches, practicing architects and engineers, are currently engaged in, and certainly they're your customers, so you would both have a sense of what it is that people are prepared to do. Why don't we talk a little bit about the kinds of process improvements that you feel are the most critical for the building industry at this time, and certainly for architects and engineers as the folks who create that information. It's their processes that are going to have to be changed or adapted or modified in some way to make this next step that's going to benefit everybody else. So, and exactly how can building information modeling, or your own solution in particular, help affect these changes? And we'll take Phil first.
Well, I mean, this is of course, kind of the key issue, because irrespective of what particular technological approach a current customer is using, I think there's a perception that a shift to a model-based approach represents some kind of a fundamental change in the way buildings are created by designers. And I don't really think it can work that way when you're not looking at it from a technological perspective, but looking at it from a practice perspective. And the practice of architecture and engineering is one whose context is created by owners and whose legal standards are created by precedent. This is a concept called the standard of care. The standard of care establishes how we are expected to perform. Right now, the standard of care is focused on the generation of accurate, integrated, coordinated information that goes to the field that is absorbed by certain kinds of established construction protocols. To me, what's very interesting and provocative about these process changes is that you're describing, Jerry, is that they actually have very dramatic near-term and long-term benefits. The near-term benefits are just around getting your drawings out the door in a more coordinated, accurate way. The longer-term benefits have to do with increasing the value of the proposition of the designer's relationship to the overall process. This idea that the information that's created during the design process gets obliterated when the job gets plotted to go out the door, to me, is one of the fundamental barriers to expanding the role of designers in the overall process. And what we're seeing, and you and I, Jerry, talked about this, is the process of delivering buildings is beginning to show evidence of integration, that these artificial boundaries, that a lot of which have been perpetuated by paper, are starting to break down. So you begin to see things like project alliance delivery, design build, use of certain aspects of digital information for shop drawings, for the work of Frank Gary's office with fabrication. Each of us has examples of customers who are doing this, where these individual relationships are starting to delaminate. So in the short term, we still have to stay focused on the fundamental problem, which is making good, accurate drawings easily. But in the longer term, there's an opportunity to change the relationship to the process.
Great, thanks, Phil. Keith?
I don't really disagree with much at all with Phil's perspective on that. I agree. Smarter deliverables is a great goal. Electronic deliverables with information that conveys more than simply, the state of the design at the end, but it's also other parts of the design, other pieces of information. We do need to be talking about electronic interchanges at all phases in the project life cycle. And the real benefit to that is to the owner ultimately. After the building is actually designed, he gets an operating manual. So he ought to be, if you talk about process changes, the owner is the one, I think, with the most to gain from the efficiencies in the process. And I speak more to the deliverable at the end, his operating manual for his building or his plant or his hospital or his airport or something. Surely he wants that to be designed faster and better and cheaper, but of course, he's going to be spending a lot more of his dollars or making a lot more dollars depending on his efficiency of the use of the building. So I think we're all in alignment on that objective.
Well, I'm glad that everyone is so agreeable this morning. Phil, do you have any?
No, I'm glad Keith made the point, because really the value of this information that is available to the owner, I think, is unquestionable. The broken nature of the process, where an owner, when he hires an architect or an engineer, doesn't really appreciate that information is available or even valuable, is one of the big fundamental questions that we get all the time. I like this idea of building information modeling. How do I get paid to actually do it? Well, if the tools are focused on solving today's problems but generating tomorrow's data, then the discussion that you can have with an owner when you're negotiating a fee can take on an entirely different tone. Right now, we hear pretty consistently that we like this idea, we'd like to give this information to the owner, but we're not getting paid for it. How do we get paid for it? And I think that as these tools become more typically used in the flow of work, that data becomes available, and then we can sell it. We architects can sell it to our customers who are our clients.
Great. Keith, you want to add?
Yeah, only one additional point there, because I think Phil's points are very valid, is, we do have additional issue now of who owns the data. Mm-hmm. When there's an electronic deliverable and there's intellectual property conveyed and the owner is going to get some benefit from it, I agree. The creator ought to get paid. How can he get paid? And over what period of time should he get paid? These are much bigger issues. And I don't think, your typical architect's view of his business includes, what I should do? I should reinvent the process, or so we kind of have to start from the demand side, I think, with the owners, and in particular the larger owners, recognizing the value they're getting.
Okay, thank you. We have tended, and certainly I'm an architect and I bring that focus to this, but we tended to focus a lot on the information creation aspect of the issue, and that is what architects and engineers are doing. I'd like to pose this question, which was actually suggested to me by a friend, Paul Teichholz, who was the founder of the Stanford University Center for Integrated Facility Engineering. And Paul is an engineer. And Paul asks, says that developing a robust building information model is only a part of the problem. Unless this model can be shared with the various engineering disciplines, the general contractor, subcontractors, and then used by the owner for facilities management, it will be of small value. So it isn't just getting that front end step, it is passing the value down the chain. So the question is, what software technologies are going to allow the building information model developed during these early phases of the design to be used by other members of the team, and how will those members be ensured that their changes and additions, and I guess now we're getting into kind of an intellectual property question, to that building model will be consistent with the others? How will the integrity of the model be ensured? And I guess each of you have something in your solutions that address that, so let's start with Keith.
Okay, I sort of explained at the beginning my view on that, when you speak in the abstract about the building information model, you might have a mental image of there being only one and it being a kind of a monolithic thing, and we put information into it and we check information out of it. I don't really believe that's the way the process can or really even should work. When you speak of the building information model, you should be, in your mind, thinking about many different types of data, many different creation tools, many different authors, and in fact, you know, the concept of when the change gets checked in, how does the consistency of the database assured, is one that I think really has to understand kind of the nature of change within the AEC, an AEC project. What is a building information model? In the end, I think the answer is, well, in many states, during a process, the process of creating a building information model, it's going to go through many changes. It's going to be inconsistent. I think we have to recognize that there is need for, and actually no alternative to, having the ability for the information model to be kind of a flexible and pliable thing. In other words, there has to be kind of soft linking in an information model. And then I think what we're really looking for, when I suggested a managed environment, you have lots of different data sources, you have lots of different data types, you have a managed environment which is capable of understanding the interdependencies between those types, and it enforces kind of consistency or determines where there's inconsistency, because sometimes you know, you are going to allow and want inconsistency in the information model. So, you know, that's just kind of the reality of the process. I mean, you could wave a magic wand and say there is one central database, but that's not really what we're talking about, I don't think. So I don't know whether there was also a question in there about the intellectual property conveyed when someone contributes to the process. But, you know, you need tools for that as well. And I think we are talking about, and we will get into, I think, many more tools for that.
Okay, great. Phil?
Well, you know, this question of, I'm going to answer the question in the reverse order that Keith took it and try to get this intellectual property question off the table first. Some of the work that I do is with the AIA on the contract documents program, where we sort of study the problem of practice protocols. And one of the things we've realized recently as a profession is that existing intellectual property protocols in the industry don't work in a digital model. And I think it's going to be very hard to predict a priori how those new rules and regulations are going to work. Right now, what people are really concerned about is sort of securing their data. I want to make sure that when I transfer my data, nobody changes it. And we both have technical solutions to that problem. But to me, that raises a kind of larger question about the extent to which we should expect technology to manage practice protocols. And you know, I'm not a technologist, so I don't know very much about the inner workings of how data structure works. But it seems to me that there's a pretty straightforward set of criteria that you can establish to determine whether a tool's working properly or not. I mean, if people can get their stuff in and out, if they can do so in a reasonably coordinated way, if they can do so on projects that are of sufficient scale, and the process is comprehensible, then the tool has sort of passed the test. And I really think that the larger question here is going to be one of how, you know, in a way it's kind of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You know, the presence of the experimenter changes the nature of the results. The presence of digital information in the building process is going to change the dynamic. The technology, it's a little bit like bioscience right now. The technology is out ahead of our practice standards and our sort of ethical standards for how this stuff is going to work. Right now, pretty consistently, and I used to do this for a living, owners demand the complete ownership of the digital asset and architects hand it over. What's interesting about where we are right now is that the complexity of the digital asset has now exceeded the owner's ability to manage it. So you can give the owner the building information model, and he or she frankly can't manage the problem. So the way the way various players are going to interact with this data, engineers, owners, contractors, is going to be a function of the designer's ability to manage the inputs and outputs, because the model itself is simply too complex for our customers or clients to actually understand and grasp. I don't think that we really want to. I don't anticipate a day where, you know, our clients, as architects, our clients are buying copies of heavy authoring apps so they can interact with the building information model. There has to be another strategy there. And those kinds of strategies can be modulated depending on the degree of involvement that you need with the data. Obviously, engineers need authoring solutions, but people outside the process have to interact with the information model in a different way. And that's the challenge.
Thanks, Phil. Keith, you have something to respond?
Oh, well, there is some, I'm a technologist, so I'll just acknowledge that up front. And I think of solutions from a technology perspective more so. But there is technology available today, things like digital signatures and ways that you can protect a file so that it can't be changed even though it can be viewed. The alternative to that kind of a solution is to do things like, instead of sending the more intelligent information, dumb it down. And, well, the most dumbing down you can do is send a piece of paper, but we have other ways of sending electronic.
The most stupid thing you can do is send a piece of paper.
Right. The electronic pieces of paper are, you know, maybe a little bit smarter than the physical pieces of paper, but I don't think really long term, you know, that's what we want. So instead of requiring the process to involve lots of fits and starts and, okay, there's a smart deliverable to somebody who has an authoring tool, I think we want smarter viewing tools working on live smart data.
Yeah, and I agree. I guess trying to take the longer view, you know, there's a building not too far from this one that was done by a local firm here in Boston on a very large building on an incredibly fast schedule, start to finish in 7 months. And when I asked the principal in charge how he ran the job in terms of the digital information, he said, we didn't really have time to think about it. We dumped all the digital data on the table. Everybody used it. And by the time somebody got to it, somebody else had changed it. And we had to sort of live with that as a protocol. Now, I'm not suggesting that as a project management strategy for a big, fast, risky project, but I do think it suggests that the way we interact with digital information is going to change the relationships to the players. And as technology providers, we have to be a little bit careful about over-prescribing the relationship protocols, because we're not going to be able to predict how people are actually going to do their work.
Okay. Well, I think you know, we have some clear emerging differences in approach here, but I would like to turn now to a question from Bruce Jenkins, senior analyst with Daratech, happens to be right here in Cambridge. Bruce?
Thank you. This is a business rather than a technology question, but it's one that might tell us a lot about how fast and how widely building information modeling tools and approaches find acceptance. The building industry, in a sense, is fragmented among architects, engineers, builders, owners, and operators, and of course firms that do more than one of those things. And each of those professions has its own way of participating in the economic value of a building or a project. And my question, I can top Jerry, my question has 3 parts. Which of those groups do you think will lead or drive the move to building information modeling? What specific opportunities to create new economic value will they be seeking? And how will they have to change their business models and the ways they do business with one another to capture that opportunity?
Well, Phil, you get to go first on this one.
Because I wrote the question instead. Okay, so first let's take the first one, which is who drives this idea of the building information model. That one, to me, is actually quite clear, both from my previous life in practice and in my current life. I actually think there's a dumbbell effect here. And what I mean by dumbbell is it's kind of a push-pull model. The push piece has to come from, do architects and engineers believe that they can get their current assignments done better with better tools? And the better tools, I think we're all convinced, are model-based tools. So that the push has to begin from the originators of design. You know, as I've said before, the most important database in the design enterprise is the brain of the designer. All that information that gets modeled has to come out of somebody's brain first. But there has to also be a value proposition on the other end of the continuum, which is actually for the owner. So I believe that my personal belief is that because the industry is so fragmented, you're not going to see it all come up at one time, but in certain building types, you're going to begin to see interconnects between the value. For example, we are starting to see a lot of interest in our customers who design, operate, and build retail facilities, because they have a highly repetitive problem, which is driven by a set of relationships and a data model, and they need to understand that thing, teach designers in a successive way to do it, drive a standard, and then have a digital asset at the end. So the economic value proposition for the designer who's involved in that process, where modeling is immediately apparent, is that they get the production efficiency of a coordinated set of drawings and a stable data set that they can use to build the next big box or gap or whatever. Then the owner gets the asset on the other end. The financial models around that are going to be evolving, but I think that what you'll probably find out is that architects will eventually and engineers will eventually move to models where they charge not only for the creation of the data, but for the maintenance and the access to the data. We need new compensation models in the industry itself for how that's going to work. Did I answer all three questions? Yeah, I think I did.
Okay, Bill. Keith, do you want to take a shot at that?
I was afraid when you were talking about dumbbells, you were going to be pointing to me. Sorry.
No, we're the answer to dumbbell.
So, anyway, I think we touched a little bit on the beginnings of who's got the greatest incentive and who therefore is likely to drive it. I think if you can think of the type of it's owners, I think, who have the economic incentive and therefore are likely to be the drivers. The type of owners, I think Phil gave an example of a retail outfit. Think of people whose buildings are mission critical. If it's part of their business, they're going to be worried about operating more efficiently. I think you think of office buildings, and most people think of them as just an expense, and they don't try to optimize them too much. But if you think of, I gave an example before of an airport. The asset of an airport is its facility. It's the way efficiency, how quickly you can get jets in and out of an airport is going to determine whether you make money or lose money in the airport business. Hospitals are another example. So these are typically large projects. So I think the larger the project, the more likely the concept of an information model is going to resonate with the owner, and therefore the more likely they are to drive the process from the perspective of the people who contract with them. Now, talking about new opportunities there, I also, when I think of an airport or a hospital, I doubt they consider, BIM to be a core competency. I doubt they're going to say, I need to hire a new BIM master. But, like they may have had webmasters. I just made that up, by the way. If anybody becomes a BIM master,
let's use it. I like it.
Right. But hey, that's an opportunity too. Now, I don't imagine that most architecture firms want to turn themselves into technologists, and certainly not the architects within those firms. But think of the way they make money. They sell their services. If another service, they could say architects, engineers, and BIM masters or something. I think they are likely to attract the larger projects. They are likely to have more longer term, more recurring business, et cetera. So, I don't think it's unrealistic that large facilities can drive BIM. It hasn't really happened to any large extent that I would say today, though.
Okay. Phil, do you have any
Well,
response?
I think Keith and I are in violent agreement here. When I was in practice, I did an airport and a couple of hospitals, and I can tell you that our clients had this interest in exploiting any tool possible that would reduce their ongoing operating cost. The challenge there is right now that they're not willing to make the upfront investment in the creation of the model. And I think the real lesson here we're taking out of the playbook of our manufacturing group, who has the manufacturing industry, who kind of understands the data integration of the supply chain, has begun to optimize a lot of these ideas around repetitive products, which is why repetitive products like retail products are the ones where customers have it's mission critical, but it has to do with delivery and operation, and it's repeatable, extensible data. So I think it'll be a while before the mainstream of airport operators move across to this paradigm. But there are other enterprises in the design sector right now that see the benefits immediately.
Thanks, Phil. And I appreciate that violent agreement is definitely what I was going for.
Yeah, I bet.
Oh, come on, Jerry. You're not hoping for entirely violent agreement on it.
We were actually going to play checkers if this doesn't work out.
Okay, well, we may have a few minutes at the end. Keith, you want to respond to that point?
Well, I'll be maybe a little bit less violently agreeing, but one thing I don't necessarily think that we are in total agreement on. I think Phil's making sort of a distinction between kind of existing processes, and I think he calls them drafting-based processes and modeling-based processes. And I think he's implying there that there's a substantially different approach from the creation tools perspective, and that's where I do think we do have some disagreement. I think we have lots of pretty good modeling tools today, and so I don't think the process from the architects and engineers perspective has to change. What they need to do is add to their process. So that's my counterpoint.
Thanks. When we're talking about adding to the process, and I think both of you touched on and I want to thank Bruce for that question and taking up the multi-part challenge.
It was three questions.
Both of you in your answers really touched on this idea of financial models and sort of the behavioral or transactional model of the facility. What it is that folks are trying to do with that building, which is not traditionally something that many architects or all engineers have included in the process. And there's an implication, I think, in both of your answers that to help move the adoption of building information modeling along, we may need to think about more incentives for everybody in the process. And part of that incentive for owners is modeling some of those things, like actually the movements around a nursing station in a hospital, or the flow of aircraft around a terminal, or the leasing transactions in a shopping center or an office building. Is there anything in either of your approaches that not necessarily at present, but in sort of the product roadmap, where you see, as the role of those who create the information expands, that we will not just be modeling the building, but modeling the asset?
So, I'm sorry, I forgot whose turn it is.
And it is Keith's turn to answer this one first.
Wow, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I quite follow the question. I think when you speak of a building information model, I include in that lots of if you're contrasting the type of information necessary in order to model the flow of an airplane around a hangar to just the physical, how large is the hangar and how large is the airplane, how expensive is it to have crews on the ground, etc. I don't think necessarily that type of information is part of the building information model. However, that information is going to be stored in some other database, most likely, and the tools that they probably need, and the tools that the author of the building information model could create, is ways to have links to access, to say, hey, if you need to do a query and find out the square footage of something in this region, here's the way you execute the query. You don't have to be a CAD user to do this. Anytime anybody would have previously looked at a drawing, let's say, an owner would have looked at the drawing, if he could instead imagine a query, and let's abstract now for a moment the query tool, how he would actually do that, he could get the answer, it would come right back, the information, of course, would be current with the as-built, etc. It'd be current with respect to recent transactions, maintenance-based transactions. That's real value you're adding to him ultimately. And I don't think really the tools are of the essence now. I think it's just a matter of creating that information model and delivering it.
Okay, and I apologize if I phrased the question badly. In part, I was responding to Phil's suggestion that those who create the information may, in future, by the use of building information modeling tools, move to a different method of compensation, and that, in fact, it becomes more transactional. Now the data that we create up front becomes a more active part with a possible revenue stream attached to it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I feel very strongly that may be one of the only new revenue opportunities for the profession of architecture and engineering that's out there right now. I mean, we all spent a ton of money on CAD a jillion years ago. As I mentioned in New York earlier this week, we had a short period of time where people were doing their work faster and making more money, and then the world method of delivering buildings transfigured itself around the technology, and the schedules were suddenly shorter, and the deliverables were bigger and tighter, and we lost all of those advantages. The thing about this, I guess what you're calling as a transactional model, Jerry, is, to me, the core issue there is the data that gets created in the building information model aware that it is a building? The airport example is perfect. When I was doing National Airport, we had this consultant who modeled passenger flow through the building. And the way he did it was he took some AutoCAD drawings, and then he layered on his own sort of meta intelligence. He said, this is an escalator, and this is a corridor, and this is a bag claim device. And then he had this massive, cool database that parked planes and took passengers off of it. And he came back to us and said, that escalator's too narrow, and you don't have enough elevators over here. And it was a pretty cool process. Well, that guy got paid a fortune to do that. And one of the reasons he got paid a fortune to do it is he had to overlay the intelligence about the airport itself. The model that we had created, the AutoCAD drawings, were not self-aware. They didn't know that this is an escalator whose purpose in life is to move people between two connections, and it has the following capacities. So the ability to create that kind of information and then to be completely crass about it, sell it to the players in the process who can take advantage of its awareness as a building is a huge, huge opportunity. And I think it's, I can't wait to write the B141 scope module around selling your self-aware building information model, because I think people are going to make some serious money. I hope they will.
Okay. I really, to clarify, Keith, part of what I was asking here was if, as I sometimes do, if you talk to building owners, if you talk to a developer of office buildings or shopping centers, or if you talk to a company that's developing biotech manufacturing facilities, part of what they will say is that they think they are indeed modeling their building or modeling their asset, even though they have not yet hired an architect or an engineer. In other words, there are other people, consumers of our data, who think that the model is that this model is just a subset of a much larger model. And that's where I was going, if you want to respond to that.
Well, I think that is my point of federation of abstract data types have a view that there is a server-based program, essentially, which says, that drawing that's an AutoCAD drawing that Phil referred to earlier has the floor plan. It knows that, this level is used for this type of square footage information, et cetera. And I think, the technology to do that is one thing. We talked about, sort of the business proposition from a architect's perspective to try to say, hey, I want to be the service provider that's going to provide the tools and the service to do that. All that's well and good. I think that will happen. BIM masters, yeah.
BIM masters, I like it. Okay, thanks. Now I'd like to take a question by phone from David Weisberg, who I hope is tuned in. David is with Scion Research, and I hope that David's been following the debate up until now and is able to connect with us by telephone. David, are you there? Let's give David a minute. There's a sort of technical issue with the phone line access to this room, where we were not able to have David's call queued up and available. So, David? Okay, I guess we're not going to be able to connect with David, but fortunately, I requested that David email me his question in advance so that we'd have a backup.
Wow, this is just like Larry King Live. I love this.
Well, okay, I'm not wearing my suspenders today. So, David Weisberg of Scion Research asks, the building design and construction and operation industry is very fragmented. Design firms that are being asked to invest in this technology today are not necessarily going to be the major beneficiaries. Now, we've touched on this a little bit, but what can you say to those firms to encourage them to make the investment, even though it is their clients? And I would add to David's question, everybody else downstream in the process who will benefit. And again, I'll add to David's question by suggesting that it's really a windfall to the folks downstream who might, and why might one of your approaches be better than the other? And so the real question is, somebody is going to have to do something different. And somebody else is going to derive a substantial portion of the benefits if we look at the entire economics of both design and the ownership and operation of facilities. So the question is going to be, how do we reallocate the benefits to match the costs? Phil?
Well, I don't think there's a very philosophical answer to this question, so I want to answer it by first telling a story. When I was in practice, one of my jobs was doing all the risk management in our office. So I wrote the little block of text that went on every floppy disk, CD, and on every output plot that basically said, you may have been entitled to receive this information in digital form, but you're only entitled to rely on it in paper form. I created this sort of de facto obliteration mechanism that said, do what you want with this digital data, but I have no idea what you're going to do with it. So the only thing you're really entitled to rely on is the paper. And in a way, that's because we didn't have a comprehensible business model to say, okay, we'll give the steel fab guys our drawings so they can generate steel drawings out of it, because I frankly wasn't willing to take the risk. To me, this question, it has a very straightforward, short, near-term answer, which is a building information modeling approach where the tool is aware of what a building is and can be interacted with through a drawing set is a productivity tool, straight and simple. It generates more accurate, more coordinated drawings faster with fewer errors. The rest of this problem is it's going to be a great gnarly thing that the Institute and panels like this and white papers that we write are going to wrestle with for years to come. But the very straight up and down answer is a tool that is designed to understand what a building is and allows an architect to interact with that building, or an engineer to interact with that building in the language of architecture, which is plan, section, elevation, detail, and schedule, directly connected to the model, is going to result in better coordinated, more accurate, more sufficient, less risky, faster, cheaper drawings. To me, it really is pretty much as simple as that. The longer term benefits, we're going to have to wrestle with a little bit, and we're going to have to be a little bit. When I say we, I mean architects are going to have to be a little bit cleverer about how we attack the business model problems. I know a firm in Minneapolis that's trying to become a BIM master. They're trying to convince a hospital client that they'll manage the model and they'll take an accrual of X number of dollars a month to manage the model. But the beginning of the process is cranking drawings, faster, better drawings in the language of architecture, and that's what a model-based approach is designed to do.
Keith?
Well, I think we've touched on, I think, most of Dave's question up front, other than the last part that Jerry added, which is, how does the Bentley versus the Autodesk solution differ in this regard? And I think when we're now talking about adding value to the process and having more intelligent information and information modeling, I think one aspect of intellectual property rights is something that I think needs to be addressed as well, and something that I think we really need to have a discussion about among this group, and that has to do with who owns the data. Is it the author of the data, the original creator of the data? Is it the recipient of the data? And is there any ownership conveyed by the tool that was created it? Because I think that also is pretty serious implication. If there is a cloud over the file I give you because the information contained in it is somehow not, I don't entirely own that file, I'm a little bit concerned if either I'm receiving it or I'm delivering it. And I think that goes to how are we going to exchange information? What format are we going to send it in? I mean, this is mundane stuff, I grant you, in comparison to the discussions of business models, but it has a very relevant and I think significant implication. On Bentley's side, we've taken the approach that, hey, if information are modeled with our tools, the intellectual property right is clear, it belongs to the author of those tools. He can decide if he wants to convey the intellectual property right and put the disclaimer that Phil was describing either in the content of the drawing or on the delivery mechanism. But Bentley explicitly disclaims any ownership of information contained in DGN files created by MicroStation. In fact, we've gone so far as to document our file format. We've, in fact, helped a third party, the Open DWG Alliance, create a library to read and write DGN files. Now, I think on the other side, on the Autodesk side, this probably wasn't all that fuzzy either until the most recent release of AutoCAD 2004, and now comes along and the Open DWG guys say, hey, you know, the problem we have is that there's an encryption going on, and there's a key that it takes to read the DWG file, and it's held only by Autodesk. Now, in the case of AutoCAD 2004, I don't think it's really all that significant because they've managed to reverse engineer it, but I really would like to hear from Phil's perspective. Does Autodesk believe that information created with AutoCAD 2004, the copyright or the intellectual property rights of that information is in question at all? I think that's really important.
Well, Bill?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the larger issue first, and then we'll get to the AutoCAD 2004 piece. I mean, that as a practitioner, I got to say this question of whether the authoring tool has any intellectual property rights, I mean, it's baseless. There's pretty clear legal precedents, and there are international protocols that establish the intellectual property rights of architectural design information. There's a law called the Architects Intellectual Property Law. It's 1990, right? 1990. Yeah. There's the Berne Convention, which establishes international protocols for who owns the data. The big issue with architectural and engineering data is not what platform created it, but how many of the architect's rights he chooses to give away in his contract with the owner when the owners demand the right to the data. To me, the issue, the much more interesting issue to deal with here is, even if architects continue to do that, they concede in their contracts that owners have an infinite right to use the information. The information has now gotten sufficiently complicated, proprietary formats notwithstanding, that owners can't use it. I don't think it makes a difference if an owner gets a set of 200 or 300 DGNs or 200 or 300 DWGs that are XREF'd or integrated or whatever the technical term is, because they simply can't manage the IP anyway. I mean, this BIM master concept is really the thing that's going to be driving this. And I actually see this problem as the central problem of this extended value proposition that Bruce has described. Because as practitioners, if we continue to take the attitude that every time an owner says, give me all your data and I can do anything I want to with it, we've got zero leverage in the proposition. The bad news is that we're not really very good at pushing back on that. The good news is that the complexity of the data has now exceeded the owner's capacity to actually use that information. So you really do need a BIM master. And, you know, I'm not going to get into the arcane details of the 2004 format, because frankly I don't really understand it. But I don't really think that that's the relevant question here. The authoring platform has no ownership. There are existing legal protocols that establish these relationships, and this stuff gets dispensed out to owners as they see fit. The fact that an AutoCAD 2004 file is encrypted doesn't change the owner's right to use it.
Thanks, Bill. Keith, do you have any follow-up?
Well, I think while I think you've clarified your understanding of the intellectual property right laws, that probably I think is true, that the authoring tool, when I create a document using Word, I don't think I convey any ownership to Microsoft. I think, though, however, from the owner's perspective, he does have a right to say, hey, I would like to be able to, even granted maybe he doesn't know today how to interpret the information in a DWG file, I think he's got every right to say, hey, I want to be able to do that. And the fact that there is an encryption between him and his data put there by the authoring tool, I think is a true impediment to free information exchange and the concept of building information modeling. I just don't understand why anyone in the process would tolerate that.
Well, let me follow up on that point, because we have gotten into a favorite area of mine, which is file formats and compatibility and standards. Running up to this event, I received lots of email from people who said, why don't you ask them this? And quite a few of those questions had to do with the magic word of interoperability. Interoperability meaning lots of different things to lots of different people, but the consensus of the questioners seemed to be how do we have some, we as those who are creating or using the information or modifying it, some assurance that the formats are reasonably standard, reasonably accessible, easily shared among whatever existing or future known or unknown other applications may be involved in the process. Now, there is an organization called the International Alliance for Interoperability. It was started in 1995 by, among other people, Autodesk. And I know that both your organizations are members and supporters of that. And there was a subsequent effort in 1999 that I had a little bit to do with, that was initially promoted by Bentley, that was called AEC XML, to get kind of more semantic intelligence in the way that we share information. Both of those efforts in North America have subsequently been absorbed into the National Institute of Building Sciences, and there are other bodies worldwide who are looking at these issues. So a lot of folks really would like each of you to address both in general in terms of building information modeling, and if you wish specifically in terms of product offerings, what your view is of the IAI, IFCs, XML, or any other form or means of sharing and interoperating on data, whether the building model in its entirety or any part thereof. And I guess it's Keith's turn to go first.
Okay, you mentioned IFCs and AEC XML, and I guess I'll start with them. IFC is, kind of an interchange, an export format for publishing building kind of geometry and some relationships. The concept of an industry foundation class, I think, has kind of grown a little bit old. But we do still support the IFCs, and I think we still do participate in the specifications of the IFCs. And I think that we do have users who are using it, and we're committed to that fairly long term. I don't really see there as an alternative to IFCs if you're looking for a sort of a batch export to a neutral format. The second, AEC XML, really had nothing to do with, and I know Jerry was the founder of the AEC XML concept, really had nothing to do with the geometry. It had to do more with the other attributes. And I still believe that AEC XML was and is the best hope we have for creating an interchange format for building information. Probably I wouldn't call it part of the building information model. It's a kind of publishing format. It's a great tool. XML is a great tool for having interchange between two programs. So I still think both AEC XML and IFC are relevant, but we don't tend to talk about them anywhere near as much these days. One reason is that I think probably the process that people want to enable the most is, hey, I'll send you my file, you send me your file, and we'll kind of edit them simultaneously. I don't want to have to do an export and translate and import. Tom's over there nodding because I know he was involved a lot in the way that information used to get exchanged, at least from MicroStation perspective. What we've done is we first of all said the DGN format is open so that any other program can read and create DGN files, or at least if they can't, it won't be because we won't tell them how to do that. We've published that specification, and we're working with the Open DWG Alliance to create a library to do that. Second thing we did is we directly read and write DWG files from inside MicroStation. Now that's a lot of work because the format of DWG files had a lot of concept misalignments with the way that MicroStation created things, and we just by lots of hard work made it so that MicroStation is kind of bilingual in both DGN and DWG, and I think that works pretty well. And I think that process solves at least some of the friction that had been costing money and causing kind of mismatches, impedance mismatches between steps in the design process. And I think ultimately, when we're talking about building information models and the model lasts much longer, a stable format is very important.
Bill?
Well, I think that this interoperability question is going to continue to get more and more vivid as the kinds of information that are exchanged through the building enterprise and the interconnects get to be better understood. I think one of the challenges to the concept of the IFCs is that it was trying to solve a problem ahead of the technology that was available to take advantage of it. And so, we were one of the founders of IFCs, and we continue to apply resources to IFCs. You know, our latest version of ADT is IFC 2.x compatible, and we continue to commit to IFCs to the extent we see our customers interested in it, which is, especially in North America, it's pretty moderate interest. I think strategically, it's kind of important to think holistically about this problem, which is that the way the users in the design enterprise are going to begin to use and create and connect data as model-based solutions begin to evolve can't really be predicted. And so we have to have a series of options for how we might connect the data. I mean, the efficacy of the DWG format that Keith's been alluding to, I think, is an artifact right now of the very drafting nature of the world. I mean, I'm sure Tom was having issues with, you know, when he was at KPF over MicroStation versus DWG, because most of his consultants were probably trying to use AutoCAD while his office was using MicroStation. And that, I mean, and those are legitimate concerns that will get worked out in the marketplace. But there have to be lots of options out there for how these interconnects occur, and those options include, in addition to IFC capability, being able to do a universally understood published format. We all agree that, you know, the guys downstream can't use the data. They need to be able to query it and interrogate it, and we do that through DWF, through connectors to other databases where Revit is ODBC compliant, other kinds of APIs that are in our drafting engines, and we feel that we have a very wide array of possible connector ports that will anticipate how these players in the process begin to connect themselves. But I feel that it's a little reductive to presume that the modeling interoperability is kind of solved at a file format level. I think it's a bigger process issue than that.
Keith, rebuttal?
Well, I guess my rebuttal is more of a question, I think, because I think I'm a little bit confused in what Phil's describing there. He kind of contrasts model-based to DWG, and I'm not sure. Do you consider DWG to be model-based or not? Is that the distinction you're making? Because I think I'm confused in trying to understand your answers.
Yeah, under the protocol, am I supposed to answer the question here, Jerry?
Okay, well,
what am I supposed to do?
I don't quite understand whether I'm answering when Phil asks or responds uses the term model-based. Does he mean to exclude AutoCAD or not? That's
Okay, let's deviate from the protocol for a moment if you're going to yield part of your time. Sure. So that Phil can clarify.
So just so I understand what question I'm being asked here, am I being asked, is AutoCAD part of a model-based solution? Is that the question?
You refer to this transition to model-based, and are you then distinguishing that from, and you say drafting-based versus modeling-based, when you say that, do you mean AutoCAD, yes or no, on the model-based side of that?
Yeah, no, I'd say no. I don't think AutoCAD is a model-based solution. AutoCAD is a drafting solution.
Okay,
so
when you say model-based, you mean Revit then? And when you say
Revit and ADT, yeah.
Drafting-based, you mean Revit and ADT?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Right. Now I think maybe we can have a discourse at a higher level.
You want to rebut that for a minute now, or do we want to move on? Okay.
I would love to hear an argument that AutoCAD is a model-based solution. That would be fun, but probably not accurate.
Well, it was, and thank you both for that. It was interesting that both of you referred to Tom Hernandez for your examples in your previous answers, because it's up to Tom now to answer the next question. So I'd like to introduce Tom Hernandez, who is a columnist for Building Design and Construction magazine. Tom?
Right, we've been talking about all these great, wonderful tools and the exchange formats and all that. Bigger question is, what is it going to take for the industry as a whole? And only a small percentage of practitioners are using model-based tools right now. I think the tools are there. They're certainly usable. They're certainly a viable product. Now, what is it going to take for the rest of the industry, not the 1% that's using it right now, to accept the method by which to practice, which means a complete changeover? What is it going to take in the next couple of years to get people to just even consider using it?
Okay, it's your turn, Phil.
Is it my turn?
Yes,
well, I guess, Tom, my answer to your question would have a couple of parts. One is the definition of the industry as a whole, which is, you know, I imagine a world where everyone is working in a model-based solution, and Data is flowing across the enterprise.
Yes.
Everyone is making vast amounts of money. Construction as a process is optimized. Errors and omissions have become a thing of the past. Project liability insurance companies are out of business.
Talking Jetsons architecture.
We're talking the Jetsons.
Yes.
Okay, now let's rewind to our world, right? Okay, our world has to do with getting drawings out into the field. That is the key issue, and I think it is one of the most important conversations that's going on in the industry right now around this transition. But as you've seen me hypothesize, I mean, as my colleagues from Bentley have, I think that these full-blown process transitions to different kinds of ways of working take 10 years before they're fully embraced by an industry. And we're maybe in year 2 or 3 of embracing. I mean, there are people using model-based tools, but it's not a universally embraced concept. The viability of the tools in the short term is going to be a function of how well they help our current customers get their work done. And getting their work done is getting accurate coordinated drawings out. And so in a way, the process change, if you've got a customer X who's on neither one of our platforms, there's a customer X who's making tracings in their kitchen with a T-square, okay? The process change for that customer is reorienting the way they author information. This is a platform agnostic answer. They've got, in order to reorient their authoring strategy, they have to have come to the conclusion that they can do their work better, because the fact that their drawings are usable by the steel fab guy is frankly irrelevant. So the real discussion, the real evaluative criteria in the short term has to do with making a decision that seems strategically coherent in terms of the evolution of the industry, but getting your stuff out the door inside the constraints of a fixed fee, which is the day-to-day problem that practitioners have.
Keith?
Well, I think as any technological evolution, Tom, as you know, the key to it is, how do I get there from here? This is the way I've been doing things. This is the way you'd like me to do things. How much do I have to change? And if the amount that you have to change is minimal, you'll take the step. If it's great, you probably won't, or you'll wait, or you'll do it once and see how it works out. So, I think Phil's drawing this big, long line between drawing-based and model-based, and I see there's really a ramp, and I don't believe it really is, all or nothing. I think you can do some model-based if ADT is included in model-based, or Triforma as model-based, and some MicroStation and some AutoCAD. And I think that's the way it's going to work for a long time to come, because not everything's going to get modeled. A lot of things are going to get drafted. A lot of things are going to be created by tools that maybe Phil wouldn't call model-based tools. I think in the end, it gets to be a building information model, because if there's building information in there and it can be queried and the user and the owner, gets value from it, he'll pay for it. And it doesn't really have to be, black or white, I don't think.
Okay. Phil, did you want to...
Well, I mean, I can completely understand the evolutionary strategy for customers who are currently working on top of Triforma, because they want to continue to evolve. But the reality in the market right now is that people are not working in model-based forms. And in a way, one way to think about this problem is to say, forget about the building information model. Look at the tools, evaluate the tools as a practitioner on, I don't care if there's a building information model back there. Let's look at the output, Let's look at the stuff that the tool is generating, and if that tool is consistent with the way my work processes work right now. Last time I checked, none of the contractors that built the buildings that I designed were looking for building information models. They were looking for better drawings. And so I agree with Keith. I think in the near term, because there are powerful tools out there that are necessary to annotate the information that comes out of the building information model, in the same way that our Revit customers use adjacent copies of AutoCAD for annotation, and Triforma customers do the same thing, and I'm guessing you guys did the same thing at KPF, there is going to be this juxtaposition. So the near-term issue has to do with, can I get my work done better? Are these drawings any easier to deal with? And it's very boring stuff, like, do the sheet numbers match up? Did I miss any doors in the door schedule? When I changed the target on sheet 6, did it change on sheet 27? This is really boring stuff, and it's very dry, but it's the stuff that architects get sued over all the time. I took more than a minute, didn't I? I'm sorry.
We going to balance those things out at the end. Keith, did you have a minute of
Either that or
rebuttal on that?
Whoever uses more time has to buy the other guy lunch, right? That's how it works.
Well, again, I think, kind of technology evolution is the right way to go. I agree with Phil. If you're not using ADT, you're an AutoCAD user and you haven't started using ADT, I think ADT can be a fairly natural thing because, whatever ADT doesn't do, you can always fall back to AutoCAD. I think when you start describing Revit as, an equivalent step, maybe it has benefits. I'm sure it does. But it is a much bigger decision to make, and the implications of, okay, now I'm in Revit, I have to go over to AutoCAD. I think those are the kinds of issues that will put blocks in front of building information modeling, if that's the way we define building information modeling.
Okay. I'd like to ask one more question before we go to the direct debate portion of the program. And that, not that you guys haven't jumped ahead into the direct debate, but, and that is, I mean, here we are, we're delivering this event live over the internet. People really need just their web browser and perhaps a simple plugin to do so. We've touched on the idea of publishing information, of sharing information, of interacting with information, and we've certainly seen the benefits in other industries, not in the AEC, design and construction industry, of collaborative solutions to design. What the mechanical design people used to recently call concurrent engineering, where everybody can get on the same page, something that is difficult to do in a paper-based world, but has some very seductive appeal in an internet-based world. So I guess the question that I have is a two-part question. I'll defer to Bruce by only asking two parts. The first part is, how do you see building information, how do you see the information in a building information model being shared or collaborated upon in an internet-based environment? And assuming that there is some way to resolve that, how do you feel that how would you address your respective approaches to issues like relationships and change management, or design history, auditability, and accountability, once we get into as the future Jetson architecture world that we all hope for becomes.
I was going to say.
Yes, so we have
yeah, that one's Tom's, okay? We're not taking credit for that one.
We've coined some intellectual property here today. We have BIM Master, courtesy of Keith Bentley, and we have Jetson Architecture, courtesy of Tom Hernandez. So on this question, Keith, you want to go first on web-based collaboration,
right,
change management, and so on?
Okay, I think it's a two-part, because the first part had to do with, I'm using the web and I have two users who wish to see the same thing at the same time. Is that the basis of the question? That's a fairly hard problem to do because, if you're talking about rotating and transforming something, you're editing something, sending the information over the web, even if you have a fairly high bandwidth, the frame rate's going to have to be fairly high, and then so you try to do things like sending only deltas. We have a program that does that at Bentley Systems, and I think it's pretty cool, Jerry, don't get me wrong. I don't think it really has all that much to do with the concept of building information modeling, other than the viewing part of it. So I'm going to spend less time on that and more time on your second part of your question, which had to do with, all right, now imagine what we instead have is two designers, each of which are working independently on related parts of a project, okay? And that problem is extremely hard, particularly if their changes relate to one another or interact with one another. Bentley really is the only one, I think, that's done much work on solving that problem. We have a product called Project Bank and a technology that is now being moved inside MicroStation. The way it works is it keeps a design history. You mentioned that. Keeps track of every change that's happened on a project, every committed change, and then when those two hypothetical users make their change, commit their change to the master copy, the changes are merged. And that's pretty incredible stuff. What happens then, of course, is you introduce the possibility that there can be conflicts, that file that had two changes to it can end up in a state where somebody's change conflicts with somebody else's change, and we have a solution for change management. It's really leading edge stuff, which I think will really promote more parallelism in our designs. The fact that we then can keep track more closely in every V8 DGN file today, you can turn on design history and see who made every significant change. You go back and colorize, what's the difference between the last time we did the 30% review and today's state of the project? What's changed? What used to be there? That's the hard problem. So design history, things like that, collaborative engineering, that's where I think the real exciting Jetsons architecture, if you will, is headed.
Okay, and before Phil answers, just to clarify what I had in mind with combining those two parts into one question, is that everything that you said, Keith, in your answer to the second part, I envision happening between or among people who are operating not both at a distance and asynchronously, so that there's with the web or with remote access to wherever the information is stored as a way of saying, okay, you made a change, I made a change, how do we reconcile those changes? And maybe that happens online, maybe it even happens in real time. There's certainly other disciplines, for whom this is important, and if we're looking at process change, that might, in the Jetson architecture future, become part of what we do. So with that, Phil, you want to tackle any or all of that?
Well, I guess there are a couple ways to look at the problem. I'm fond of comparing notes with our colleagues within Autodesk who are in the manufacturing industry and seeing how they're trying to attack this problem of concurrent engineering. And a lot of concurrent engineering is, Boeing 777s and Rolls-Royce engines, but for the day-to-day guys that are making, widgets and telephones and consumer goods and machines that make other machines, the aspiration is semi-concurrent engineering. And I think really there are some lessons to be learned there in the building industry because we're significantly more fragmented. So this idea that information getting shared through the enterprise, you got to be pretty broad. You have to think pretty broadly about how you move that stuff around. I mean, this idea that you can see project information through a browser is a pretty powerful concept, and it's even more powerful now that, at least according to our information, about 80% of our users are connected to an intranet worldwide. That means 80% of designers that we serve have a way of beginning to flow information digitally, and so there are different ways that one could get that information to them, and the technologies are different, and we have Buzzsaw, and there's 75,000 people parked on that thing. It's a slightly different philosophy. It's not really the point. The point is that the aggregate building information model as it exists today doesn't reside in a single authoring tool. It's a spray of information that is doc files and Excel files and DWIFs and DWGs and DGNs. It's all kinds of stuff, and there needs to be kind of a place where that stuff can live, and it also has to be able to be broadcast in an appropriate way. It has to be published out in a way that things can be viewed. The change management and the accountability question, I think, is at some level it's a technology issue, but at another level, I go back to my original thesis, which is understanding if the data itself includes an inherent understanding of its relationships. If the system at its core level understands that a wall is a wall and a door is a door, and those two things have a fundamental relationship, then that relationship persists through all interactions with the data and can be used to manage the way teams sort of integrate their stuff. But there's actually a third point that I want to make that I think is more germane here. Now that I live in this cool technology world, it's really tempting to begin trying to find pieces of technology that manage projects, and I don't believe that's actually possible. I don't believe that you can take a piece of technology and substitute it for project management. I tell that to my customers all the time. You still are the central player in the process. You have to deploy the technology to get the information out in an organized way that meets your objectives, and a website and a database is not going to do that stuff for you. You still got to run the job, and I think that's an important concept that we need to get on the table.
Okay, 3 minutes exactly. Very impressive.
Thanks.
A minute for
I've
Keith.
practiced 10 times according to my notes here.
Well, I think the concept of I agree with Phil's statement that, it's really difficult to manage these kinds of projects because they are so distributed. We have so many different disciplines. We have so many different design individuals and maybe even combined design teams that I think the experience in the manufacturing world might lead to the exact wrong conclusion, which is let's lock everybody into the database, and let's have one copy of every piece of information, and you check it out so that you can own it, so that you can make the change to it, and anything that depends on it, I'll also have to check out, and then I'll have to check them all back in. That model just simply doesn't work. It's been tried several times. It works pretty well in the manufacturing world. It just does not work when you distribute information the way that typical AEC processes do. So that's why, our perspective on this is, look, it's a distributed problem. You have to have a distributed management environment. That's what MicroStation and our ProjectWise servers do, using the design information, the design history information that's held inside DGN files.
Bill, any follow-up to that?
Well, I guess I just need to draw a conceptual distinction between integrated data and aggregated data. I mean, to me, a building representation is integrated if it is self-aware that it is a building and there's a set of explicit relationships. It's aggregated if it's separated into pieces and you have to manage those relationships yourself. And there are two different philosophies about how to attack the problem, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Okay. Well, now we're at that interesting time in the program where we're going to try to shift the format a little bit and see if we can have you guys directly question each other without too much intervention from me for about a half hour or so. And I would remind you that the format is one of you gets to ask a question, 3 minutes for an answer. I'm going to be a little bit stricter on the timekeeping here. 1 minute rebuttal from the questioner, and then the other guy gets to ask a question, and we'll go back and forth.
We don't get 3 minutes to answer our own question.
You get a minute to ask it.
Okay.
So they can be multi-part questions. So with that, I think we'll have enough time to go back and forth 3 times. That is, Phil, you go first. You'll ask a question. Keith, and you'll have three shots to ask. You'll have 3 shots to ask, with your respective chances to answer. Shots only in the metaphorical sense. Chances, opportunities.
Okay, if you're going to use the word shot, then I want to introduce you to the concept of crossfire, because you're sitting in the
because
middle.
I'm sitting in the middle. No, I recognize, and I would remind you of the dumbbell argument.
Right.
With that, Phil, why don't you ask Keith the question?
Well, I think this is a great opportunity to take advantage of the technical know-how that we have at the table here. And I'd just like to ask Keith what he feels the key evolutions in technology are going to be that may accelerate or assist in this whole enterprise. I mean, our companies seem to be, we're vigorously competing for an idea that we pretty much agree on, and that I think the industry is beginning to agree on. And the X factor here is what kind of cool stuff might happen to accelerate that. And I'm just a country architect. I don't know much about the technological cool stuff. I just buy it as soon as I can find it. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about just what kinds of new technologies you think are coming that might help this problem somehow.
Okay, well, I'll preface my statements by I am a technologist. I am a software developer, and cool technologies really interest me, Phil. So I probably will bore here, but what I see is, software is always about layers. There's a lower layer which solves general problems, and the higher you get in the software layering world, the more specific problems. So you have, the operating system, and then you've got a CAD platform, and then you've got applications on top of it. And I think it's the shifts at the lower levels that tend to push benefits up to the higher levels. I see a tremendous shift happening over the next, say, 3 years, coming from a shift happening actually by Microsoft in the new technology around .NET. And I think the new approach to software development and the concept of kind of smaller encapsulated pieces of code, sort of embedded. Think of a parametric model which has driving it a piece of .NET code which understands, this is a wall and this is a relationship between it. But not only that, say, take your architect's program of the building and say, I want to describe, these are the parameters I want to solve, the number of seats in an auditorium, the number of rooms in a hotel, et cetera. And these are the way that you describe that. And the architect sort of draws using relatively simple tools and then uses expressions that define the relationships. And then from that, MicroStation or some tool, abstracting some tool, could generate .NET code that would define those things. Man, that's really cool, because then you have kind of applets that are generated even by guys that don't consider themselves programmers, architects, for example. We wouldn't have even been able to conceive of that only a few years ago. I think that the concept of late binding, the way that Microsoft are architecting the operating system to host those applets, it's really cool, and it's going to be, I think, radically different than the architecture of today.
So does that mean, so can I use my 1 minute of rebuttal to ask a follow-up question, because I'm actually learning something here. Does that mean that, do you jettison the old stuff and you start new on .NET, or how does it work?
Well, that's the really, really, really amazing thing about this. The way Microsoft have approached, every new technology. We talk about technology revolutions. Look at DOS to Windows XP. You take a DOS user from 1986 and drop him down in 2003 and show him Windows XP. He's going to say, wow, that's a revolution. Well, every step along the way, Microsoft made everything that you used to be able to do, you could always do. You can even run DOS programs on Windows XP today. Most all of them continue to work. And the way .NET works, it just comes for free. You continue to do everything you previously did, but you can also host .NET applications. It's done very, very well, in my opinion.
And you don't mind if we
No,
warp the
please.
format here a little bit? I mean, what about the hardware stuff? I mean, we're seeing tablet PCs. Tony's got one. I'm getting the exact same one pretty soon there. Large scale, kind of interactive format plasma stuff, wireless networks. What else?
Well, I think the form factor of the hardware is changing all the time. I think, in particular, the pen-based stuff is really cool. I think, in fact, that's a tremendous example of kind of the value of a platform. I think, so as I said, software architecture is built on lower layers. The reason that Tony can run Word on his laptop or pen computer, Jerry can use his laptop, and I have a desktop, and we could even have a server. It's all based on a single platform, and it interoperates very, very well. I don't know what other new form factors, if you ask, beyond that. I think everything gets smaller, but your hands don't get any smaller.
Thinner, but not smaller, right? Yeah.
Tom has a 24-inch one, he said.
Yeah.
Pen computer.
23.
Okay, that's interesting, and we could probably go on, and maybe we'll have a little more time at the end to come back to future technology. Keith, do you have a question for Phil?
Well, Phil, I think that the term you threw out earlier, which I think is the first time I've heard it, but I think it's pretty good, integrated versus aggregated, with respect to the approaches to data modeling. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's your view of Revit versus ADT or AutoCAD. I think you take the approach that Revit is integrated and ADT is aggregated. Now, my personal view is that an integrated sort of single central database is not the right approach. But from your user's perspective, suppose I could draw a magic button here, and from your user's perspective, everything they see in Revit, let's suppose you could implement all of that using AutoCAD, maybe even building on top of ADT. And my magic button would eliminate any problems that the aggregated approach would have. Don't you think from your user's perspective they'd have you push that button?
Well, so I want to understand the magic button here first, because it's there might be a product idea here, Keith. Let me.
The magic button.
Magic button in a box, right? Yeah, you can add that to Jetson's architecture. So the magic button is if one could use a tool like AutoCAD and suddenly create a building information model. Is that the question?
Yes, more or less.
Yeah. Well, this magic button idea, it's not really very interesting to me. So I've decided I'm jettisoning the product, the product concept here, because the fundamental challenge, I think, in all of these later generation authoring strategies around models is, and I'm going to switch hats now, right? I mean, some of you know that I teach part-time, and one of the things that we do in the architecture school is we teach architects how to think about architecture. And what we have to do now is we have to teach them two completely disconnected concepts. First, we teach them how to conceptualize a building in plan, section, elevation, and what the fundamental representation strategy is. Then we have to teach them all this stuff in between about how to make a line, and it doesn't matter which tool it is, how to make a line in this tool or that tool or the other tool, and you have to conceptually connect the two. You have to say, okay, this is the fundamental thing you do is make buildings. We have a language that we've understood for thousands of years of how buildings are represented, the language of orthographic abstraction. To achieve that language of orthographic abstraction, these are all the hoops you have to jump through. You know, I'm fond of saying to my team, my marketing team, that none of my students at Yale decided to become architects because they think the AutoCAD interface is a really inspirational thing. You know, the connections are just not there. The magic button to me, or the term that I use called integration, is there a direct, visceral, conceptual connection between the way a designer enters information into the building model? Do they use the concepts of plan, section, and elevation? And can they interact with plans and sections and elevations in a dynamic way? And forget about the building information model. They get a building. The building information model is in their head. So if I had a magic button, the magic button I would press would somehow connect the conceptual design process more directly to the creation of data. And the language, the real magic button is the language of architecture. We don't need a magic button. We need tools where people can work in plan, section, elevation, and in detail directly. Edit those things, coordinate them, connect them. I mean, to me, that's the magic button. That's the one we should be looking for.
Keith?
Just to be clear, the magic button wasn't going to be part of the product. That was going to be the button that you would push that would make your software work together. So what I was saying is, you know, the concept that you say is, you know, you want to be able to think like an architect when you're using architect's tools. And I agree with you. And I'm saying, don't you think you could implement that in AutoCAD? And I guess you're saying, no, you don't think you could. And I'm saying, look at how Microsoft evolved Windows. Started with DOS, got to Windows XP, they're going to go to Windows, Microsoft.NET. Don't you think if you tried hard, you could innovate within AutoCAD and you could make a new version of AutoCAD that had a better user interface and that was able to generate, you know, all of the new concepts in Revit within AutoCAD? And wouldn't that be a better thing for the same reason we want platforms to be able to run, you know, laptops and pen tops and desktops, you know, the evolution of the platform. We've had 8 versions of MicroStation. I don't see anything in Revit that I don't think we could implement inside MicroStation, and that's what we're, you know, intending to do.
I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that if you want.
No,
or you can just ask Keith another question.
I think that, you know, one of the great things about the way the market works is that people have different approaches for how they solve the problem. You've had 8 revs of MicroStation, and your users have benefited enormously from that. We've had 6 revs of 5.5 revs, 13 if you count all the releases of Revit in the period since the company came into existence and we acquired it. So it's just a question of which platform you're going to push off of. AutoCAD has been an enormously successful thing, but it's still a geometry and drafting engine. We've decided strategically that an approach that works on the fundamental problem of building representation from the ground up, describing a building, not transferring another technology, but describing an actual building where those relationships are understood at their most fundamental level, is the right strategy. But you know, I think it's very exciting. I'm glad I'm not out there by myself trying to convince people that this is the right way to go. And we sat in New York on Tuesday. We had you guys, my guys, the guys from Graphisoft, and even the new guys at the table via Gary's office, the guys from Dassault, and we're all telling pretty much the same story. There are issues of implementation and technology and orientation, blah, 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 and we all can write white papers about why our competitive positions are contrary. But the encouraging thing to me is that we're at least all pushing the same rock up the hill. You've got one toy that you're using to push your rock, and I've got another toy to push the same rock. But at least it's the same rock.
Well, okay, that we got out of sequence there because I wanted to give Phil a chance to respond to the specific questions about your products, but Phil, it's your turn to ask Keith a question.
Well, I guess let me ask the question. Let me ask the question that I tried to allude to earlier, Keith. That maybe you can enlighten me a little bit. You mentioned that you've had 8 versions of MicroStation / Triforma. The model-based philosophical approach, I presume, hasn't really changed. I mean, our two companies differ about when we think the market is ready to actually start the adoption. What do you think are the primary barriers to widespread adoption of modeling tools? Not just your modeling tool. You guys got there first, but at some level. But what is the big issue? Is it? It's not. I don't think this is a feeds and speeds and feature function, or frankly, a technical architecture argument. There must be something else out there that's a barrier to adoption. What is it?
Yeah, I think you're right on there, Phil. There, in fact, I think is a layer beyond just saying, hey, let's create models. Because as you pointed out, you want models and you want to be able to aggregate models, or at least I believe you need to be able to aggregate the models. But, just having multiple files sitting on the same directory on the server, doesn't do much to aggregate them. You're right. And who knows whether that drawing is a copy of, somebody renamed the file and put a different extension on it. So I think, what really the next catalyst for change will be in the sort of the process, and that people will start recognizing that they are creating models, even if they're using simpler tools. It doesn't have to be a harder tool to create a model. I think Revit proves that. But what they would use is a system that has kind of a server component. The server component manages, check in, check out, has ways of synchronizing changes, has ways of generating reports. I think that's an absolutely necessary next step. It hasn't really happened much, and I can tell you, Bentley's been working hard at that problem, but kind of getting user acceptance to the fact that they have to put some structure on top of their project because it's for their own good, sometimes doesn't really sit very well.
So you think the primary barrier is a technological one rather than a business process or a value
Hey, I told you I was a
proposition?
technologist, Phil.
Yeah.
And,
No, I'm just trying to see.
I see that
how
as
you guys what the angle of attack is here.
I think that if somebody attempts a project and they're unsuccessful with it,
Back off.
that's a technology and a business issue. They spent money and they didn't make money. They're not going to take the next step. And I think some early projects, whether they were MicroStation or AutoCAD or some random CAD, if they were just if they were creating something that they thought of in their mind was a model, and some people in their mind think 3D means model.
Yeah, I agree.
If they thought they were creating a model and the information wasn't managed, I think they probably lose a lot of information. They run into conflicts. They run into the problem that you're describing of, the drawings that are extracted from those models are incorrect because they used the wrong version of them, et cetera. And they say, oh, it didn't work. So, I'm not saying there aren't also business drivers that also, you have to make money by creating. You have to believe creating a model is either cheaper, faster, better, or, I'm in a new business, the new opportunities. Mm-hmm. And all those things have to happen too. But
and I'm in a new business, right?
Right. But also, if it doesn't work, you go back and you say, well, I used to make money drafting, and I bring out my old drafting boards. But it's both a technology and a business issue.
No, but it's interesting to me that that there is this, that you guys see it in a way that part of the barrier to adoption is the perceived complexity of the data as it lives on the server, and the need to, were you saying, and the need to grasp that thing? I mean, everybody's products have these issues, right? On the AutoCAD side, it's managing XREFs.
The XREFs are part of it. Yeah. Also, your off-sheet call-out, this is referenced by that. Mm-hmm. Are they in sync? That kind of indexing information done on a server, I think that's a key catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to deviate from the format for a second, I'm interested, Phil, in where Autodesk is on the same question you asked Keith.
You mean in terms of what we think the barriers are?
In terms of what you see as the barrier.
I mean, we have a slightly different problem in that our user base is now understanding the benefits of the approach. Keith's users already understand it; they're already doing it. So it's actually It's actually I think it's a different, we have to talk about the problem in a different way because we're pushing off from a different place.
Okay. Actually, I think it's the next question is from Keith. So.
Okay, Phil, and this question really is of Autodesk. I don't know in what regard you feel like you can or should speak for Autodesk, so you tell me if I'm...
If I say anything wrong, Carol will yell at me, so it's okay. Not that Carol, the other Carol.
All right, so my question really comes to me from our perspective of, hey, we have a business model. Bentley has a business model. Most of our users are on a subscription. We upgrade our products periodically, just like you upgrade your products. Our products are all sort of installed in due course because you don't pay additional for each upgrade. But Autodesk just released AutoCAD 2004, and I think, this is my perspective, of course, and I'll preface it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were 4 major policy decisions that weren't based on technology decisions that you made in AutoCAD 2004. The first of which was Autodesk decided to change the file format at all. And my assessment of the release, AutoCAD 2004, is it looks to me like you're writing the same bytes out onto the disk in a different format. And we all know how expensive it is for users when vendors change file formats. So that seems to me to be a policy decision that you made, and it has direct implications on your users. The second policy decision was you decided to encrypt it.
Is there a question here, or is this?
Yeah,
okay.
I got 4 policy decisions you made.
Okay.
This is a 4-part.
Oh, these are the 4 policies. Okay,
Right.
sorry.
The third policy decision was...
Hold it, go back. I missed the second one.
The second one was you encrypted the new DWG format. You changed it, you encrypted it. The third one is you removed the ability to save back to older versions of AutoCAD. Now, that has to be a policy decision because it can't be a technical decision. You could have done it before. That means you obviously had the ability to do that and you decided not to. And the fourth one is after changing the file format such that now every user has to get a new copy of software from Autodesk in order to read the new files, Autodesk removed the ability to get a free viewer for DWGs. The new viewer doesn't view the DWG format at all. Now, my question is, I think we could sort of understand that there's a motivation to do that from Autodesk's perspective, but from a user's perspective, any one of those 4 decisions has major implications, and how is it, from my user's perspective, how is it good for me, any one of them?
Okay, well, let me answer the questions that I can, because I'm not the technology guy who drives the AutoCAD team. I've got other fish on my plate. And I'll answer these as best I can. Let's do these in reverse order. As far as the free user goes, the free viewer goes, we have a new viewer. There've been about 250,000 downloads of it since we released it. It was my understanding that it did read the new DWG format. Maybe
I believe it only reads DWF, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay, we'll fix that, or we'll look into that and see. I don't have a detailed answer on that. As far as the save back to R14,
I just only want to know from a user's perspective, is there any reason I should prefer that?
Well, I guess we made a series of technological decisions about AutoCAD 2004, and I'll wrap all your previous 3 points into one. We made a series of what we believe to be decisions that drive the technological advantage to our customers. We think we understand pretty well who's out there using what, how many extant copies of R14 are out there, and who's using them. And the improvements that were made in the DWG format, and I can't answer your questions about encryption because I don't really understand the whole problem, frankly, but the improvements that were made in the file format were made directly for user benefit. True color, speed, size. The files are much smaller, they're much faster, and they're much higher resolution. Now, some of these other issues around saving back to R14, I mean, your questions are asked and answered. Clearly, you have an attitude about this. Those decisions had to do with what we felt was appropriate relative to how our user base were using the tools. And I can't give you any more detailed answers because I don't have it. Is this the follow-up part?
Yeah.
If you're finished, this is the follow-up.
Okay.
So, in the case of R14, you said nobody wanted it. I'm just trying to understand. I'm a user. I wanted that, or maybe you're saying no user ever wanted it, and that's certainly your prerogative to do that. On the file format thing, however, we've had 8 revisions of MicroStation over 19 years. We changed the file format once. we added a lot of new capabilities in MicroStation, so I think I have a pretty good perspective on whether you could have done true color without changing the file format. And, you know, a compression, I'll grant you, that was a good thing. You compress the file, but don't you think you could have made it an option? I mean, if you made it an option, then everyone could decide whether that I want to install 2 seats of AutoCAD 2004 and leave the rest of my users on AutoCAD 2000. Now, I don't necessarily just mean to be cantankerous about this, although I think changing the file format every other year just shows that, you know, your objectives are not necessarily aligned with your users. I think it's, you know, it's a business model. Our business model is all our users are on Select. Everybody gets all the upgrades. We therefore don't have to put people through the ringer in order to force them to upgrade. And that's what I think, you know, this really just amounts to. And, you know, maybe I'm just missing it because there's some good technology reason, and maybe you're not the man to explain it, but somebody certainly should, I think.
Well, I'll give you a chance for rebuttal.
Well, I mean, you know, I guess I'll take a technical exception to the change the file format every other year. This was the first file format change that we've made in quite a while, and you can take up the argument, you know, you can take up the product management argument, you know, with our product management team, but we have a pretty large, significant, and extremely vocal installed base, and they're quite clear about what they're interested in. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read the reviews in the press of the recent release of AutoCAD 2004, but they are uniformly spectacular. The review in Cadence this week gave us 5 stars out of 5. And you know, we're going to have business differences about strategy. What we do, at least the part of the, what I know we do as a business, I can't speak for Autodesk in general, is we try to figure out what the best thing is to make our customers more effective. We're going to have differences of opinion about what we think those things are.
Okay, in keeping in sync, the next question would be from Phil to Keith.
Well, I have to think about this for just a second here. I guess, Keith, my question is the following. As much as I enjoy arguing with you over the ADT, the AutoCAD file format, I'd actually like to talk about a different question. And I'm going to steal the concept from Tom here. Could you describe for me what the characteristics of the Jetsons world, architecture world actually looks like? I mean, clearly you guys have been working along a certain path for a sustained period of time, and it must be based on some large-scale vision of where you think the industry is going as a very critical player in technology in the industry. I'd just like to understand a little bit about where you think, if we do get to Tom's Jetsons world, you know, what does it look like? What are people doing? How are they using either your tools or my tools or whatever? You know, what does the world look like, and how long does it take to get there?
Okay, well, first of all, as much as I'd like to imagine it, I don't think everybody's going to be using our Bentley's tools. I think they're probably going to be using a lot of your tools and a lot of other people's tools. It's going to be a very mixed world out there, I think, for the foreseeable future, any horizon that would make sense to talk about. So it's going to be an aggregated world. I think you know, the tools will get better with respect to kind of the intellectual value that they bring to the process. You know, in other words, you talk about tools that know that walls are walls and et cetera. You know, one of the things that I think is kind of key to that whole process is, you know, you have a platform, you layer on top of that platform functionality in ways that users and third parties and yourself, or ourselves in this case, can extend it. And so it's going to be a fairly hybrid world. I think you ask how long is it going to take there. Well, I think we're always going to get there next year. I mean, we're always going to be improving this year. There'll always be something more to do next year. I don't think we'll ever be done. And I think it's kind of continual improvement from within. And that's the way I view it. And there is a long-term view. I think we've made some fairly significant changes, at least with respect to the data model inside MicroStation, and I referred earlier to the concept of server management layer. I think that's also key to the next steps as well.
Any follow-up to that?
Well, no follow-up question. I was kind of wondering because I'm wondering whether at some point there's going to be some consonance around the way that technology providers. I think there's this basic principle that the future of the industry is going to be a function of the ability of technology providers to supply, to use a vendor term now that I'm a vendor, to supply their users with the tools that allow them to enable their process in certain kinds of ways. And I was just trying to get a sense of the extent to which you guys felt that how much leadership and vision the technologists have to provide versus sort of incremental, responsive functionality. Because it's a delicate balance, and I'm not even sure where I am on it personally. Because if you keep giving users exactly what they want on a feature function basis, at some we won't really begin to make some of these large scale jumps. But on the other hand, how presumptuous is it for the Bentleys and the Autodesks of the world to stand up and espouse their vision of the future? I'm not sure that's even a question. I just was trying to reconcile it in my own
I
mind.
agree. Every so often, a great idea comes along, and you just have to implement it. The way I think when that great idea comes along and we see it, we believe that the best way to implement it usually is to figure out how it fits in what we're currently doing, rather than think of I like the Microsoft analogy of every new release of Windows got better, and you have to grant them, even if you are not Microsoft fan, from DOS to Windows XP is a pretty big transition.
And aren't you worried that Linux might come along one day and wipe out all that incremental
Well,
usefulness?
it's interesting. A couple of years ago,
It's shocking that I would even know what Linux is, frankly.
but here's an interesting sort of corollary to that. A couple of years ago, remember how cool it was that the web came out and Netscape was just a revolution, and everything's different in the world where Netscape exists. And remember people saying, oh, this is going to replace, it's the biggest competitor Microsoft ever had, and then Netscape is going to become the operating system. Well, what happened? They were Microsoft, but Microsoft implemented that great idea in Netscape. It's now in Internet Explorer. What do? You boot Windows and you click on Internet Explorer.
After a big lawsuit, right?
Okay, to get back onto the prescribed format, there's one more question coming from Keith for Phil.
He doesn't get double credit from the last one? I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So he gets double
So
credit
one more,
for the answer.
and
One more question.
I don't think this one's quite as cantankerous, but the question of openness. I believe it's really, really fundamental. When we talk about building information modeling, you're going to create a model with Revit, you're going to create a model with ADT, you're going to create a model with MicroStation. Now, I understand that file formats are hard to decipher, and file formats are not necessarily the answer unto themselves, but don't you think fundamentally the concept of an open file format is superior to a closed file format, and in particular an encrypted file format? I mean, just philosophically, don't you believe
Are you
that's
back
a
to
good thing?
cantankerous again here?
Philosophically, don't you think openness is a good thing, and if I were a user, I'd be voting for openness?
No, I don't have a philosophical position on openness or closeness, Keith. My philosophical position is around functionality. What we really need to do is, rather than presume that if all applications consume, digest, and use all file formats, then there's a lowest common denominator mentality that is frankly too early in where the industry is in the adoption of the models. The thing that is interesting to me about this whole proposition is this file. It's a very unresolved attitude that needs to get worked out. Where I sit on this question is the following: you've got this evolving idea of a building information model, which is a core authoring concept, and we should do the best job we can to make the best models that we can. They're 2 orders of magnitude more complex than their drawing predecessors. Making a drawing format open and accessible and a drafting engine with APIs is one strategy. But the key question is, what's the relationship between this building information model and the thing next to it that wants to do something? The structural analysis engine doesn't need the finish schedule. The code and life safety evaluator does not need the energy analysis calculations. And this goes back to Jerry's original question about the IFCs, which is the extent to which you have to deposit in some strategy of complete openness all that data in its full glory and complexity. I would argue that the right strategy is one where there are designated interconnections. And if that means opening up the file format, I don't know. I think we have to wait and see. But what we really have to figure out is, what is it that the industry players want to do, and what are the necessary connections to make that happen? And I think it's laying open the entire file format, and let's forget about the DWG discussion for a while, and just talk about whatever way your data is organized in your building information model. I think that that connection strategy has to be designed. It shouldn't just be here's the whole data model out in the world, do with it what you will. So we've got several, as I said earlier, we've got several science experiments going on around which of these things make the most sense. But I'm not sure what a fully open, it's a very democratic idea. I'm not sure what it gains us in terms of solving this particular problem. And I would also add that I think that the ultimate acceleration toward Jetsonville is not only going to be a function of using the engine to do the current work well, but to do future work better, and to begin to right now, one of the great benefits of a model-based enterprise, irrespective of platform, is that it automates lots of low-value chores that are boring. Coordinating call-out bubbles is no fun, and you can't pay somebody little enough to do that, right? Because anybody can do that. Anybody can do that kind of stuff. The question is, when can we begin to expand the functionality of quote-unquote low-value chores? Doing a code evaluation of a building is not a low-value chore. Calculating the occupancy of the building is extremely low value. Checking the connection points between two exits is not a low-value chore. Measuring the width of the corridor is a low-value chore, and I think we've got to start demonstrating that the value of executing that low-value stuff begins to grow, and you don't do that by blasting open the file format and letting anybody do what they want.
Brief rebuttal, Keith?
Well, I
disagree,
agree that opening the file format doesn't necessarily mean that you'd be able to write a program that would be able to correctly interpret it. But in the abstract, open's got to be better than closed.
Well, maybe, or maybe directed is better than undirected, where you could say, okay, here's the port to our model to do structural steel analysis. Plug into it. This is how to use your tool. Don't worry about the rest of the model. We'll take care of that. And it may be, I don't know, I can imagine a world where not only is it a port, maybe someday it's an XML protocol and it's published to the world. It's called the Building Information Model.
Oh, well, now, if you were talking
XML
about
protocol.
the model is saved as an XML file, I'm in total agreement with you. There's nothing closed about it. Then we don't have to have that debate.
No, that's not what I'm saying, though. I'm saying that strategically, I think that these interconnects have to be designed with a strategy in mind, not just wide open. But there's 14 engineers on my staff that'll probably argue with me about this.
Okay, regretfully, I have to cut this off here because we have about 2 minutes left, and what I'd like you each to do is to take a minute or less and identify from your perspective what you think the principal, if you would like the audience to take one specific thing or one major perspective away from today's discussion, what you would like that to be. And I'll let Keith go first.
Okay, well, I think we agree that there is a new concept, building information modeling. My view of it is doesn't really require creating different types of information, and in fact, we've been doing lots of building modeling for a long time. I think Phil points out that, hey, there's some new ideas along the line, and things like Revit are important. I look at Revit and I say, yes, there's some definite new advances in the art in Revit. They should be incorporated into a product like AutoCAD or MicroStation. That's just my view of it. I think that is not only doable, but I think that's the most natural thing to do. I see Autodesk announcing, Revit is a strategic building information platform, and I just don't quite understand how that could possibly work. And I think really the reason I bring this up is I think it points out sort of the objectives of the two companies. In the one case, you have the Bentley model where we attempt 100% to align our objectives with our users. We innovate, add new things, create new products that build on top of ones you've already used. And I think in the case of Autodesk, they have a different view of that. They'd rather you start over, and buy something new. So anyway, I think the business strategy is important. The business strategy of your vendor makes a big difference to you long term. And we are talking, this is not video games. This is, mission critical software for everyone, and you want, I think, a vendor who aligns their objectives with you.
Okay, Phil?
Well, I guess the message I'd like to leave is really the following. I am really excited about the idea that there is a large-scale dialogue going on inside the industry about changes in the way we do our work. Different businesses, as will always be the case in an open economy, have different strategies for how they're going to attack that problem. We happen to believe in a different approach than Bentley, and as far as I'm concerned, that's all goodness. Because the point I reinforce that Keith made is that this really is mission critical stuff, and architects and engineers and contractors use our respective tools in ways that are fundamentally different than the way other kinds of pieces of technology get used. I mean, during the course of the debate, Jerry's used his copy of Eudora, his copy of Microsoft Word, his copy of Excel, episodically turn them on and off. Our customers sit in front of these machines for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and they are, all of our customers do, and I think they're extremely savvy about how they make decisions about the angle of connecting those tools to the work processes. The message I think I'd like to leave everybody with is the enthusiasm that we have for looking at the problem in a way that is most beneficial to the way people do their work. And there are a series of tools out there, and at least we're not having a conversation about whether this is a good idea anymore. Now we can have a conversation about who's solving the problem best. We have certain resources that we bring to bear and a certain kind of strategy, and they're more revolutionary than evolutionary, or integrated rather than aggregated. Use whatever terminology you want. The beauty of this current situation is at least the conversation is progressing to the point where we can begin to evaluate tools on their merits. We can begin to evaluate technology on its merits, and the designers and engineers, architects, contractors, and owners of the world can begin to directly connect how a tool will drive their business propositions on the merits. And I'm delighted to be involved in a conversation like that. Delighted.
Well, with that, I would like to thank both of you for your time and attention. Anyone who is interested in pursuing further analysis, commentary, or discussion, I would invite you to visit laserin.com, my website, which is the place where you logged in. Within a few hours, there will be an archived version of this video stream available that you can link to at that address as well. So on behalf of Phil and Keith, Autodesk and Bentley, and here at MIT, thank you very much for joining us.
On behalf of my colleagues.
This is great.
Thanks very much.